Weeks later, the dust settled, both literally on the training ground and figuratively on Colonel Thorne's career. The official report from the Iron Gauntlet, pushed through by General Cole himself, told the unvarnished truth. Colonel Thorne's reliance on brute force had failed, and the timely, brilliant intervention by Sergeant Vargas had salvaged the exercise. The consequences for Thorne were swift. He wasn't immediately discharged, but he was reassigned from the prestigious combat unit to a dull desk job managing vehicle maintenance records at a small, isolated depot in the Midwest. The irony was heavy. The man who despised mechanics was now sentenced to shuffle their paperwork for years. He had lost his command, his reputation, and his chance for promotion, all because he couldn't see past his own pride. Ellie's life, however, changed completely. General Cole secured funding not just for the maintenance of the 5 Shermans, but for the creation of a special training unit dedicated to historical tactics and adaptive command. Ellie was promoted to warrant officer, a rank that recognized her technical genius and leadership without trapping her in the political ladder of the officer corps. She was no longer just a mechanic. She was the commander of her own unit and the primary instructor for the new course. Her workshop, once dusty and forgotten, was now the cleanest, most popular part of Fort Lincoln. Doc, Maria, and Sam formed the core of the new training team, their loyalty rewarded with status and respect. One bright morning, Ellie stood beside Gutsy, which was now fully repaired and gleamed with a fresh coat of olive drab. She looked at the polished steel, no longer feeling the sting of the past, but the solid reality of her hard-won future. General Cole walked up, sipping coffee. "Good work, Warrant Officer Vargas," he said simply. "I hear you're planning a trip to the original Arracourt site in France with your team." Ellie smiled, looking out across the Tennessee pines. "Yes, sir. We have to see the ground the originals fought on. We owe them that." "You know," the general mused, Thorne kept repeating that the Shermans were too light, too weak. He didn't understand the real lesson of Arracourt, or of life. It's not about how much weight you carry. It's about where you choose to put your heart. You put yours in the right place, Vargas. Ellie tapped the steel of Gutsy one last time. She wasn't soft. She was steel-forged by fire and focused by purpose. She had faced down arrogance, saved the mission, and earned the highest respect, all while driving a piece of history that proved the small and the underestimated can always win the day. Ellie pulled her beat-up M1 Abrams T-23 The Avenger into the maintenance bay. The engine bay hissed, a sound more of weariness than power. The tank was officially operational, but unofficially it was a temperamental beast, prone to communication failures and sluggish turret movement. Her crew met her there, looking exactly as Major Hollis had described, a collection of young soldiers who had lost their spark. There was Private Rodriguez. The driver slouched against a track, flipping a coin. He looked bored and resigned to failure. Specialist Jones, the gunner, was running a nervous hand over the worn controls in the turret, his brow furrowed with anxiety. And Private Miller, the loader, was simply standing still, looking up at the high walls of the motor pool with unconcealed discomfort. Ellie called them to attention, her voice ringing out in the cavernous space. At ease. "I'm Sergeant Vance. I'm your tank commander. And for the next 2 weeks, we are the best crew in this company. Understand? Silence." Rodriguez kept flipping his coin. "Look," Ellie continued, her tone shifting from military to conversational. "I know what they said about us. I know this tank is old, and I know Major Hollis gave us this assignment because he expects us to fail. He thinks we're the company's biggest joke," Jones mumbled. "He's probably not wrong. Sarge, I haven't hit a qualification target in months." Ellie sat down on the track and pulled out a worn, laminated printout, a satellite image of the Arracourt battlefield from 1944. She ignored the high-tech maps of Fort Stewart that everyone else was. "Studying, let me tell you about Arracourt," she said, her voice dropping to a conversational narrative tone, perfect for a voiceover. September 1944. The 4th U.S. Armored Division had M4 Shermans. Those tanks had thin armor, a gasoline engine that could light up if hit, and a gun that was okay, but not great. The Germans? They had the Panther. Thicker armor, better gun, and a superior sighting system. On paper, the Shermans were dead before the fight even started. Rodriguez stopped flipping his coin. Miller slowly lowered his gaze from the ceiling. Ellie pointed to the image. At Arracourt, the American tanks were outnumbered, sometimes 4-1. The Germans came in waves. This wasn't just a battle of steel. It was a battle of courage and smarts. The German commanders expected the Americans to run or fight them head-to-head. That's what they were trained to do. But the Americans didn't, she continued, her eyes shining with conviction. They used the hills and the fog. They used speed. They refused to stand still. They hit the German tanks in the flanks, where the armor was thinnest. They created confusion. They fired and moved. They didn't try to outpunch the Panthers. They outdrove them. She looked directly at Jones, the gunner. The Shermans had to be perfect on the move. They had to hit the exact right spot. And they did. They defeated the best German tanks and broke the offensive. They didn't win because they had better stuff. They won because they had better soldiers and better tactics. She stood up, her small frame radiating a focused intensity. That's us, crew. We are the Shermans. We are the underdogs. We have a tank that breaks down and we have weaknesses. But Major Hollis and Bulldog Benson, they are the German commanders. They expect us to rely on our armor and charge blindly. They will be looking straight ahead. We, my crew, will be looking everywhere else. She tapped the hull of the old tank. This isn't just a tank. It's a tool. And it's a time machine. The lessons of Arracourt are our playbook. Jones, I need you to be the sharpest gunner this base has ever seen. Rodriguez, I need you to drive this tank like you're threading a needle under fire. Miller, you might hate the height, but you are the heart of this machine. Get those rounds ready perfectly every time. Rodriguez finally pocketed his coin. Arracourt, huh? A faint smile touched his lips. Sounds like a good story, Sarge. It's more than a story, Private, Ellie said. It's a win, and we're going to repeat it. Over the next few days, the crew didn't just train, they bonded over history. Ellie didn't bark orders. She taught lessons. She had Rodriguez practice sudden, tight turns in the rough terrain, mimicking the Shermans' quick maneuvers to avoid German fire. She had Jones focus on fast, small-aperture targeting, aiming for the soft spots of the simulated enemy, not the main hull. Private Miller started feeling less vertigo and more focused, counting rounds and feeling the rhythm of the action. The Avenger may have been a relic, but under Ellie's command, it was becoming a student of history, ready to prove that the heart of a great soldier and a great victory lies in intelligence and maneuver, not just technology. The dawn of Operation Ironclad was cold, cutting through the Georgia heat. The air crackled with anticipation and static. Ellie's tank, the Avenger, was positioned on the far left flank of the company line, the place Major Hollis had clearly designated as the least important. Hollis's voice crackled over the company net, full of bluster. All right, company. Stick to the river road. Move fast. Keep the guns hot. Benson, you lead the charge. Crush 'em! Ellie's crew was quiet. They listened to the booming orders and the confident rumbling of the newer tanks moving into formation for the head-on assault. Rodriguez, Ellie ordered, her voice calm inside the tank's comms. Ignore the river road. We're going high and wide, through the rocky ridges. Arracourt, remember the terrain. Roger that, Sarge, Rodriguez replied, his voice newly steady and confident. He steered the T-23 off the main track and up a barely visible deer path. For the next 2 hours, the Avenger moved in isolation, slow and deliberate, climbing the uneven, difficult ground that the faster, heavier, newer M1s wouldn't dare attempt. Ellie was doing exactly what the 4th Armored Division had done, using terrain the enemy discounted. Then, the fighting began. On the main river road, Major Hollis's and Bulldog Benson's platoons were immediately bogged down. The simulated enemy had set up an ambush using anti-tank positions and clever hull-down defenses. Hollis was screaming over the radio about unexpected resistance. The sensors on 3 of his tanks immediately lit up, signaling them as destroyed. "This is impossible," Hollis yelled, his frustration palpable across the frequency. "Their fire is too accurate." Ellie peered through her sight high on the ridge. Below her, the simulated enemy tanks were perfectly dug in, their main guns facing the river road. completely exposed on their flanks to her position. They were so focused on the frontal assault that they had neglected their tactical security. "Jones, target designated," Ellie commanded, her voice a flat line of pure focus. "The lead T-90 equivalent. Center of the turret just behind the driver's hatch. Small spot. Perfect shot." Jones took a deep breath. "Target locked, Sarge. Ready to fire. Fire! Whump!" The simulated round fired, and a split second later, the bright white signal of a confirmed hit, a kill, flashed on the enemy tank's sensors. Hit confirmed. "They're down!" Miller shouted, already reloading the simulator. His fear of heights was gone, replaced by the rush of success. Ellie's voice crackled over the company net, calm and precise. "Major Hollis, this is Avenger. Enemy flank exposed. We are engaging from the northern ridge. We have neutralized their lead tank and are moving to exploit the opening. Recommend you pull back and reform." The fighting stalled. The enemy, shocked by the unexpected attack from a seemingly impenetrable direction, scrambled to turn their heavy turrets. They had built a wall facing the river road, and Ellie's little tank had just climbed over the top. The Avenger fired 3 more perfect. Quick shots, taking out 2 more enemy tanks before they could adjust. The tide of the initial skirmish was violently turned. Major Hollis was silent for a long moment, then spat a single word over the comms. Unbelievable. The exercise paused for a brief evaluation. Ellie's 3-tank team had crippled the enemy's spearhead, forcing a major tactical retreat. When the company regrouped, Hollis marched straight up to Ellie's tank, his face red with a mixture of anger and confusion. "How did you know they'd be exposed there, Vance? That's not in the threat brief. You cheated!" Ellie remained outside her turret, standing tall. "Sir, I didn't cheat. I used the terrain just like the Shermans at Arracourt used the hills and the fog. When the enemy dedicates all its resources to one axis of attack, they naturally expose another. That's a lesson 75 years old, Major? It's not a cheat. It's a tactical certainty." Bulldog Benson looked at the readouts. He couldn't deny the data. The Avenger had executed a flawless maneuver, but he wouldn't give Ellie credit. "Lucky shot, Vance," Bulldog muttered, turning away. "You got lucky. The old bucket probably won't even start tomorrow." Hollis gave Ellie a cold, hard stare. "You won the skirmish, Sergeant. I'll give you that. But luck runs out. Now get that historical relic of yours ready. Tomorrow we move into the open field. There's no terrain to hide in out there. No history to help you. Just steel on steel." Ellie knew the praise was hollow. Hollis's anger at her success was greater than his pride in the company's win. She knew with chilling clarity that the Major was not just trying to win the exercise. He was actively setting her up to fail. She was fighting a battle on 2 fronts, the enemy on the field and the prejudiced commander in her own ranks. The mockery had stopped, but the injustice was escalating. The second day of Operation Ironclad was fought in a vast, dusty plain, devoid of cover, exactly the kind of place where raw armor and gunpowder are supposed to dominate. Major Hollis was in his element. "Today, Vance, there's no place for your sneaky Sherman maneuvers," Hollis announced over the net. "It's time to see what this modern marvel can do. Benson, you lead the heavy assault right up the center line. Vance, keep to the rear. You're our backup." Ellie knew she was being sidelined, placed in a position where her quick maneuvering would be useless, and her old tank's outdated sensors would put her at a disadvantage. But she had a plan. "Rodriguez, keep us hull down at that low-rise, but keep the engine running and ready. Jones, lock us onto Benson's tank. Watch for his smoke, not the enemy's." For a terrible, tense hour, Hollis's heavy assault unfolded exactly as Ellie had feared. They pushed too fast, relying on the M1's armor to absorb punishment. The simulated enemy, having learned from the previous day, pulled back, leading the assault into a wide, shallow valley, a classic anti-tank trap. Bulldog Benson, eager for glory, charged right into it. "Contact! We're surrounded!" Benson's voice was panicked over the radio. "Heavy fire from the north and south. We can't see the source. They're using smoke, Hollis. We're blind." The system logs later showed that Benson's state-of-the-art M1 had been so focused on the enemy in front of it that it had completely missed the simple, low-tech flanking fire. 2 of Benson's platoon tanks were killed. Bulldog's own tank was immobilized, the laser sensors signaling a critical mobility hit. "Benson, get out of there! Hollis yelled. His own tank stuck too far back to offer immediate aid. "We're pinned, Major. We're sitting ducks. I can't move the turret!" Benson's voice cracked with terror. The enemy was closing in for the simulated kill shot. Ellie knew this moment. This was the moment at Arracourt when the German armor, heavy and slow, surrounded the Shermans, expecting an easy finish. The only answer wasn't more firepower. It was disruption and sacrifice. "Avenger, this is the plan," Ellie said, her voice a razor's edge of decision. "We're making a feint. Rodriguez full throttle. Drive us straight toward Benson's position, exposing our flank but at an oblique angle. Jones, load the high explosive, not the anti-tank. We need noise and smoke, not kills." Her crew instantly moved. Rodriguez didn't question the suicidal order. He slammed the throttle forward. The Avenger roared across the plain, drawing a line of dust behind it. Ellie was exposing them to the full wrath of the enemy force. "They're turning on us! They're turning!" Miller yelled as the enemy sensors locked onto the lone rushing tank. "Miller, keep loading!" "Jones, fire a smoke round 20 feet to the left of Bulldog's position. Give them a target, then give them smoke." The Avenger was halfway to the disaster zone when 3 simulated anti-tank shots slammed into its side. The cabin filled with the piercing, persistent whine of the killed alarm. "The red lights flashed everywhere. We're dead, Sarge! We're hit!" Miller cried out. "We're dead, but they're distracted," Ellie shouted back. The feint had worked perfectly. The enemy tanks, sensing an easy kill against the seemingly desperate new target, had wasted their critical firing window on the Avenger. That moment of confusion was all Benson needed. Rodriguez, now moving under the cover of Ellie's deployed smoke, was able to drive his newly repaired tank out of the kill zone and link up with Hollis. Major Hollis was furious. He didn't care that 3 crews had been saved. He only saw the red light on Ellie's tank. "Avenger, report! You are destroyed!" "Why did you move forward?" "You disobeyed a direct order to stay back." Ellie powered down the system. The sudden silence was heavy. She climbed out of the turret, covered in simulated red paint, but her uniform was pristine and her eyes were clear. She walked toward the Major. "Sir," she said, her voice low, "the M1 is a machine. The men inside are soldiers. The objective is to secure the sector, not to prove our armor is superior. Sergeant Benson's platoon was about to be overrun. I used a classic maneuver, the sacrificial distraction, to draw fire and break the enemy's focus. My tank is destroyed, Major, but 4 tanks and 12 soldiers are still in the fight." Hollis was trembling with rage. "Sacrifice is failure, Vance. You are a commander! You let your tank die! You failed! You failed the exercise!" He had won the argument, but he had lost the respect of the men who had watched the whole thing. Bulldog Benson climbed out of his tank, no longer a bully, but a quiet, deeply humbled man. He nodded once at Ellie, a sign of respect that needed no words. But Hollis was right. In the official report, she was a failure. The injustice was complete. Now, she had to fight the final battle, the one for her honor. 2 days after Operation Ironclad ended, the final, most crucial phase began, the post-exercise review. This was the moment where data logs, sensor readouts, and commander testimonies were presented to a high-ranking review board. The outcome would determine career paths and the future doctrine for the company. Major Hollis was presenting the initial findings to the board, which included a visiting general from the Armored Command, General Maxwell Thorne, a man known for his sharp mind and deep knowledge of military history. Hollis stood stiffly at the podium, projecting his voice with confident, misleading clarity. In conclusion, General Thorne, our company performed admirably, securing the objective. However, a major point of concern was the disastrous performance of Tank T-23, the Avenger, commanded by Sergeant Vance. He flashed a slide showing the Avenger's red, destroyed status. Sergeant Vance disobeyed direct orders, executed an unauthorized high-risk maneuver, and unnecessarily sacrificed her tank, resulting in an immediate failure of the crew on day 2. Her adherence to outdated OI-era tactics proved to be a liability, not an asset. A low murmur went through the room. Bulldog Benson and the rest of Ellie's company sat silently, exchanging uncomfortable glances. They knew the truth, but the data, presented by Hollis, supported his narrative. General Thorne looked at the slide, then across the room to where Ellie sat, straight-backed and composed. "Sergeant Vance, do you have a rebuttal?" Ellie rose and walked calmly to the podium, placing a thick binder on the desk. She was not loud, but the room went silent for her. "General, Major Hollis is correct that my tank was destroyed. I accept that outcome. But the Major states I failed the exercise. I disagree. I believe I executed the objective flawlessly, using the most effective tactic available, one derived directly from historical data." She paused, then looked directly at Hollis, her voice clear and strong. "Major Hollis sees the destruction of a 60-ton machine. I see the saving of 12 soldiers and 4 multi-million-dollar assets that the Major himself put in jeopardy by his inflexible frontal assault doctrine." Ellie tapped her binder. "Let's look at the data logs. On day 1, the enemy successfully ambushed the company using terrain we should have anticipated. Why? Because the enemy commanders, like the Germans at Arracourt, relied on the assumption that a technologically superior force would prioritize a direct line of attack. The Shermans won by refusing that assumption." She pulled out a simple hand-drawn map. "My move on day 1, the flanking maneuver, was not a risk. It was a calculated certainty based on the enemy's tactical profile. It was the American 4th Armored Division's victory pattern." She then moved to day 2, the moment of sacrifice. "Major Hollis calls my feint a failure. I call it an act of tactical superiority. Sergeant Benson's platoon was paralyzed, exactly like a Panther tank when its tracks are hit. They were dead. But the enemy was so shocked by the Avengers' sudden, aggressive advance, so focused on the easy kill that they shifted their focus, allowing the pinned units to escape." Ellie pulled out a specific document from her binder, a copied field report from 1944. "General, Major Hollis is demanding we ignore the past. But history gives us a playbook for the future. I believe this report proves that the principles of maneuver, disruption, and knowing your enemy's assumptions are infinitely more valuable than relying on a tank's specifications alone." She took a breath and delivered her final, powerful statement. "The M1 Abrams is a phenomenal machine, but at Arracourt, the Shermans proved that the best tank is not the one with the thickest armor, but the one with the smartest commander. I executed a 1944 Sherman tactic and saved a 2024 Abrams platoon. I failed the tank, sir, but I succeeded in my duty." The room was silent. General Thorne looked from the old WYU-2 report to the modern digital readouts, a thoughtful expression on his face. The truth of her words was undeniable, backed by data and history. The battle for Ellie's justice was about to be won or lost. General Thorne tapped his pen on the table, the sound echoing loudly in the tense silence of the review room. Major Hollis stood frozen, his face a mask of furious desperation. Bulldog, Benson, and the rest of the company waited, breathless. The general finally spoke, his voice deep and measured. "Sergeant Vance, your presentation is unorthodox, and your actions were certainly against the specific orders given to you by your commanding officer, Major Hollis." Ellie braced herself. The verdict felt like it was swinging against her. Thorne continued, "However, the purpose of this exercise is to train effective combat commanders. The data logs confirm that your actions, while defying the letter of the Major's command, saved valuable assets and personnel. Furthermore, your tactical analysis of the enemy's predictable response, their over-reliance on a fixed kill zone, is impeccable." He looked at Major Hollis, and his gaze turned cold. "Major, you prioritized the theoretical perfection of your equipment over the tactical reality of the fight. You placed your troops in a disastrous, predictable trap. Sergeant Vance corrected your mistake through decisive, brilliant action." Thorne turned back to Ellie. "Sergeant Vance, you are officially reprimanded for insubordination, but you are also officially commended for your courage, tactical insight, and successful execution of an essential rescue mission." A huge wave of relief washed over Ellie, swiftly followed by a sense of vindication. The quiet respect in the room was louder than any cheer. Major Hollis started to protest. "Sir, I must argue that—" The general cut him off with a raised hand. "You will stand down, Major. You will receive a formal letter of caution regarding your biased leadership and reliance on predictable doctrine. Your command style has been noted. Effective immediately, you are reassigned to logistics at Fort Leonard Wood, pending a full review. Hollis slumped back, his authority stripped away in a single, humiliating moment. The general then stood up and walked over to Ellie. He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he pointed to the 1944 field report Ellie had brought, the document about the Sherman commanders and their quick thinking. "The powerful twist, Sergeant Vance," Thorne said, his voice softer now, almost grandfatherly. "You asked us to consider the history of Arracourt. I have." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a worn, black-and-white photograph of a young man, grease-stained and smiling, standing next to a Sherman tank. "My grandfather was a Sherman tank commander in the 4th Armored Division. He was at Arracourt, September 1944, the general revealed. He used to tell me that day was a nightmare. Outgunned, outflanked, and almost out of hope. He said they only survived because their company commander made a single, desperate, counterintuitive move. They refused to retreat and instead drove straight into the enemy's teeth. Feigning a much larger counterattack, General Thorne placed the photograph on top of Ellie's field report. My grandfather said that the move confused the German commanders long enough for his platoon to reload and reposition. He credited that Sherman commander's intelligence, not his armor, for saving his life. He looked at Ellie, his eyes alight with understanding. Your action, Sergeant Vance, was not just historical. It was personal. You weren't just saving a platoon. You were proving a principle that has been at the core of American armored superiority since the 1940s. Leadership and maneuver will always defeat superior steel. The journey to justice was complete. Ellie had not only earned respect, but she had connected her personal triumph to the very history she was mocked for studying. Later that evening, in the mess hall, Sergeant Benson, humbled and quiet, approached her. "Sarge Vance," Bulldog said, swallowing his pride. "I was wrong. I called your history junk. You saved my life. I'll never question a word you say again." Ellie simply nodded, accepting his apology and his newfound respect with quiet dignity. A week later, the official orders came down. Sergeant Eleanor Vance was promoted to staff sergeant and given command of her own permanent tank platoon. The Avenger, the old battered T-23, was given a fresh coat of paint, a new communications array, and a new title, the Historian. As Ellie drove the Historian out for a new patrol, she didn't look back at the motor pool or the men she had silenced. She looked forward, knowing that her strength wasn't just emotional or intellectual. It was the hard-earned, undeniable truth. The best soldier is the one who learns from the brave who came before. And that history, when wielded by a smart commander, is the deadliest weapon of all.